Not what we'd hoped for. A slow and fitful economic recovery and a recovery in stocks hit by a fight with China over tech. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. This week, contributors Larry Summers of Harvard and Gillian Tett of the Financial Times. Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health.
I think there's a misperception that unless we either lock down or open up, there's nothing in between.
Senator Rick Scott of Florida.
I think the market's telling us to watch out. We got a lot of debt. You got to be careful how you spend your money. And up here, nobody cares.
Catherine Wood of ARK Investment Management. And former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan.
The idea that children somehow should only learn, in a bricks and mortar building 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, 9 months a year, it doesn't make sense.
It was a week for hanging on. Economic numbers, though positive, fell far short of pointing us back to where we'd been.
There was some pullback of reopenings and so forth, and yet, we still got 1.8 million with a big decline, almost a full percentage point drop in the unemployment rate.
Leaving us grasping for a fiscal boost out of Washington that leaders so far have not been able to deliver.
I think there's a handful of very big issues that we are still very far apart.
The other side is going out there making it like they're there for children and people in need, working families, which couldn't be further from the truth.
And this week, we saw a shadow cast over the one clear bright spot in the markets, equities, when President Trump expanded his tech battle with China to a threatened ban on TikTok and WeChat.
We want to see untrusted Chinese apps removed from U.S. app stores.
Oh yes, the virus. The virus, it just kept on coming, with numbers of cases leveling off in states like Florida and Texas and California, maybe, but deaths kept moving up, and the spread of the disease expanded to new states like Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin. It was a big week on Global Wall Street, and to help us try to understand it, we welcome now our special contributor, Larry Summers of Harvard, former Treasury Secretary. So, Larry, let's start with some economic numbers. The jobs numbers that came out at the very end of the week, better than expected, 1.76 million jobs added. Does it change our view about the path of this recovery?
I don't think at all. It confirms what we sort of knew. It refers to a survey that was taken several weeks ago. The higher frequency numbers are not as strong, and there are a variety of questions that make the unemployment rate in the 10 range almost certainly an underestimate of how bad things are. So I think the basic view that we're now in for a long slog until something puts the health problems in the rearview mirror. Nothing in this number changes that picture. Nothing in data that we're seeing suggests that the health problem is moving to the rearview mirror. And the main development this week is growing concern that the economy is going to run into a stimulus pothole because Congress is going to take us off the stimulus cold turkey. And the other main concern this week is at a moment when the world needs to be coming together around a common problem, the risks of major economic conflict between the United States and China are going up. So it's hard to feel better at the end of the week than one did at the beginning of the week. It's hard to feel better today than one felt several weeks ago. There's no strong tendency for things to be moving in the right direction. If anything, they're probably moving in the wrong direction.
So, Larry, I think it's fair to say that that V recovery in the economy doesn't seem to be developing. There has been something of a V in the equity market, essentially, and it's been led largely by tech. And that leads us to what you were just talking about, which is this growing conflict between the United States and China over technology with TikTok and WeChat. What do you make of U.S. policy with respect to technology right now, as it appears to be we're approaching or in a Cold War when it comes to tech with China?
So I'd say a couple things, David. First, we're moving into a low interest rate, low investment opportunity economy. And in that economy, streams of relatively reliable cash flows, like royalties associated with the App Store for Apple or advertising revenue for Google or Facebook, those come to be more highly valued when the interest rate is lower. And that's a lot of what's driving the stock market, but it doesn't mean a better economy for most Americans. We've got, and this is going to play out over the next several years, we're in a state of pretty total confusion in the United States in the way we view the tech companies. Are they our national champions in global competition with China, or are they our national villains when it comes to privacy, when it comes to the quality of our public discourse, when it comes to protecting consumers from monopoly power? We're not sure. And both messages come from our leading public officials. And I've been in the U.S. government. I have a sense of how it works. Roughly speaking, the Secretary of State never sees the head of antitrust policy outside of a social event. And so we don't have the processes, we don't have the habits of communication, we don't have the forums for working out an overall strategy vis-a-vis the tech companies. And it's clear that their future is intertwined with our future. And that's going to be a very, very important challenge for whoever the president of the United States is after November, to figure out what is our strategic approach to these enormously important institutions. There was an approach that was set 25 years ago when it was all just getting started, which was internet freedom, and let these things try to grow and flourish and let there be a lot of experiments. And that was the right approach then. Right. And I think it's yielded hugely important benefits to our economy and to our society. I'm not so sure, and I actually pretty much doubt that it's the right approach going forward, David. I think that as these institutions have matured into being the largest, most valuable companies in our country, they're going to need to take on a different level of public responsibility and accountability than they did at an earlier stage. And so I actually think that, and they're obviously intertwined, two of the central challenges for who's ever president, whether it's a second-term Trump presidency or whether it's, as looks more likely right now, President Biden, is going to be to formulate strategy in a comprehensive way towards China, formulate strategy in a comprehensive way towards the tech companies. And obviously those two things come together because one of the most important issues vis-a-vis China is the nature of technological competition and what technological competition means for our national security.
So, Larry, please stay with us because we're going to bring in Gillian Tett, as you know, another Wall Street Week contributor, so we can have a virtual roundtable and talk about that stimulus that you just referred to with Larry Summers and Gillian Tett of the Financial Times. This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. It's time now for our virtual roundtable, and the subject today is a stimulus stalemate, I think we can call it. And joining Larry Summers and me is now Gillian Tett. She is the chair of the Financial Times Editorial Board. Welcome, Gillian. Good to have you here. I want to start, however, with Larry. Larry brought up the question of stimulus. We were supposed to get it this week, not getting it this week. There's some real speculation. We may well have an executive order any minute now. So, Larry, where are we with the stimulus?
Look, you'll be following very closely whatever the ins and outs in Washington are. I'd stick with the economics. It is crazy to be withdrawing huge quantities of economic support right now when the economy is in the process of turning over because of the spreading of virus. Yes, there are some legitimate issues about the size of unemployment insurance checks, but for every individual who is not working because of inadequate unemployment, because of excessive unemployment insurance, there are probably 5 who are not working because we don't have satisfactory child care arrangements and financial support. Yes, there may be some tax disincentive effects, but they are small compared to the lack of basic support for taking care of the education of the kids of working families. This is that rare case in economics where demand and supply come together. We need more demand. That means injecting money. And we need more supply. And that means supporting working families. We're doing neither. It's a huge error.
So Gillian, Larry says we definitely need more stimulus. This time you have a very strong column out. All your columns are strong, let's be honest. This week in the Financial Times, talking about it's not just the fact of stimulus or the amount, but also how it's done. And in fact, what we've done so far is, I will use the word regressive.
Well, in a sense, we don't just need more stimulus, we need smart stimulus and smart support above all else. And it's very understandable in some ways that when the COVID crisis hit, policymakers dashed to provide support, and they didn't have time to spend hours or days or weeks passing all the fine details. But when we go back and look what happened with something like the Payment Protection Plan, the PPP program, which was supposed to be supporting small businesses in America, what is now becoming clear is that actually it was distributed very, very unevenly. The New York Federal Reserve released a fascinating paper this week, which essentially shows that not only did many of the most needy areas in America, particularly in metropolitan areas, not get the money fairly, but also the black businesses, black-owned businesses, received a much smaller proportion of the money than white-owned business, and they've also been essentially failing at twice the rate of white-owned businesses. So the good news is there's still quite a lot of money left in the PPP pot, about $130 billion. People are talking about more programs going forward, and as Larry says, it's pretty clear that more support will be needed. But the bad news is that people aren't talking about ways of actually making it much smarter at the moment.
So, Larry, what about it? You've been in those positions of power in the White House and near the White House. Can we walk and chew gum at the same time? Can we both stimulate the economy and correct some of the growing inequalities in the country?
I hope so. And there's a poor people versus rich people dimension of that. There's a racial dimension of inequality. There's a gender dimension of inequality. There's an immigrant dimension of inequality. There's a depressed regions dimension of inequality, and we should be addressing all of them. But I do think that we need to be, and I think there should be set-asides in each of the categories I just referred to. I would just caution, though, that maintaining a strong economy is ultimately the most important form of stimulus. And that when people try to design overly elaborate, extremely complicated models for targeting. What inevitably happens is that the whole thing slows down and less money moves and comes out. So I think that we do need to target better, but if we don't stimulate the economy, the recession's going to get worse. And that's the most regressive, anti-poor, anti-black thing that we can allow to happen. So let's respond to all these concerns, but let's not let the best be the enemy of the good.
Exactly where I was going, Gillian. That I actually learned as a Russian proverb, don't let the best be the enemy of good. Are people coming up with some way to avoid the best being the enemy of good and still not have the stimulus be, I will call it again, regressive?
Well, one certainly hopes so. And there are very practical things that can be done. I mean, to go back to the issue about why black-owned businesses are failing at twice the rate of white-owned ones. The numbers are 42% versus 17% that have essentially stopped operating since COVID hit. Huge distinction. Something very practical you could do is say, let's put the PPP money out through fintech platforms, because black-owned businesses are far more reliant on fintech platforms because they have very weak relationships with mainstream traditional banks. So that's a very simple, practical step that could be taken, and one hopes it will be taken going forward. But perhaps a bigger issue people should also be recognizing is that the type of actions the Federal Reserve has taken have also been incredibly regressive in the sense of inflating assets, which are overwhelmingly held by the wealthier parts of the population, and essentially creating a wealth gap that's widening between the wealthy and the poor. Many people, including Larry, would say the Fed had no choice. They had to go and do this because they had to do whatever it took, to use that famous phrase, to get the economy going. But that point about the regression of assets prices rising needs to be debated and understood, if not now, then in the future, and policy tailored to actually try and do something to counteract that.
But are people debating it other than in your column in the FT? Gillian, are you seeing people debating and coming up with ideas?
I think, well, in terms of the issue of central bank policy and the impact on rich and poor, there's only one central bank, to my knowledge, that's actually had the courage to try and measure what happened in the first rounds of QE back in 2009, and that's the Bank of England. And it released a report showing that almost all the gains had gone to the wealthiest 5% of the UK economy when QE was first unleashed. Now, QE is dramatically bigger, so you have to guess that the gains are even more extreme. But no, that point has not been discussed. And I would agree with Larry. We can't sit there and try and design the perfect policy. We can't let perfect be the enemy of any kind of action. But that point needs to be recognized, because if we're going to end up purely with, say, tax cuts which are benefiting the rich going forward, that's going to be stoking up more potential social tension and political problems further down the road.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, Larry, I'm sure you agree. We have an awful lot of things to deal with all at the same time, and the question is really setting priorities, which is what you did really in the government. It's not an easy job. It's easier for us on the sidelines actually to sit back and sort of take second guesses of what's going on. There's an awful lot to be done. So we're going to thank now Larry Summers, our very special contributor on Wall Street Week. He's, of course, the former Treasury Secretary as well as now at Harvard. And Gillian Tett of the Financial Times with her great column on how we're doing this stimulus. Coming up, everyone seems to want more fiscal stimulus, but how are we going to pay for it? That's the concern of Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida.
Our states are saying, oh, we haven't been able to balance our budget. Maybe we can use the coronavirus as an excuse to get some money out of the federal government so we can put the money down on our pensions, pay for our excesses.
This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg.
The trouble with these deficits is not so much the size of the deficit today, when there's a lot of unutilized capacity in the economy, but are we on a course that carries us continuing along with these kinds of deficits as the economy does recover? It's certainly time looking ahead to begin seeing reducing that deficit.
That was Fed Chair Paul Volcker talking about the need to address the growing deficit back in 1975, when it came to a grand total of just $53 billion. This year, the federal deficit was $2.7 trillion in just the first 9 months of the year. And that's before another round of fiscal stimulus, which is what has led some Republicans, like Senator Rick Scott of Florida, to resist too big a stimulus package, even though they agree we need to do something.
We know we need to take care, and I want to take care of the people who have lost their jobs. We know we need to take care of our small businesses and reopen our economy. And what Schumer and Pelosi are talking about is election reform, postal service. These are issues that we should talk about, but this is trying to get our economy open and take care of COVID. So and last week it was so frustrating because we weren't done. We knew the existing unemployment system, the additional money that we put up was going to expire. We had a bill, Martha McSally had a bill, and Schumer blocked it. I mean, it's like they're being disingenuous. They say, oh, we care, but they don't really. And what I'm concerned about is the unbelievable dollars that we're spending. We're going to have, about $27 trillion worth of debt, at least by the end of the year. Our Federal Reserve, just to keep interest rates down, has bought about 60% of our net Treasury issuances this year. Gold's at record prices. I think the market's telling us to watch out. We got a lot of debt. You got to be careful how you spend your money. And up here, nobody cares. It's like spend, spend, spend. And then our states are saying, oh, we haven't been able to balance our budget. Maybe we can use the coronavirus as an excuse to get some money out of the federal government so we can put the money down on our pensions, pay for our excesses, which means that if you're a Florida taxpayer and you said, I got out of Cuomo's New York because the taxes are so high, then Cuomo's come back and said, no, I want money out of the federal government. Well, that means Florida taxpayers, every taxpayer is going to be paying for this.
So as you suggest, Senator, there's a lot of money we're talking about. There are a lot of zeros after the numbers as a practical matter. One of the biggest gaps, it seems to me, is that assistance to the states. It looks to me like the Republicans and Democrats basically agree there should be some help for the schools to get the schools reopened, but for state assistance generally. Why is it the Republicans feel so strongly? Why do the Democrats? We all agree the states are hurt in part by the pandemic, don't we?
Well, I think we all understand that we should help our states, and we did. We gave them we gave state and locals over $500 billion, and we gave them loan access to another $500 billion. So we've given them a lot of money. Now, I was the governor of Florida from 2011 to through 2018. I had 4 hurricanes. The federal government never said, oh, Governor Scott, let me give you all the money for your costs with regard to these hurricanes. They never did that. They paid a portion. They helped us with sheltering. They helped us with debris pickup, but they didn't cover our lost revenues. And what these states are saying is, I thank you for the money on the coronavirus, because we're paying, federal taxpayers are paying 100% of it, but we want you to take care of our unfunded pension plans. We want to take care of, New York sold some climate change bonds. Help us with that. Help us things that we would never pay for. So I want to be helpful to our state and locals for the coronavirus. I do not want to pay, and I don't think Florida taxpayers should pay for the excesses of New York or California or Illinois or New York who never live within their means.
That was Republican Senator Rick Scott of Florida. Coming up, it's all about the virus, and we hear from the man who spent a lifetime battling pandemics, the general in charge of fighting this one, Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
If you're talking about a medical question, listen to the medical experts. You will not get a conflicting message.
This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. As we've learned more about COVID-19, we've changed how we fight it, with states using a combination of testing, contact tracing, social distancing, mask wearing, and hygiene to keep people safe. The United States conducted about 5 million tests last week, but more tests can mean longer wait times for results.
Most importantly, testing and tracing, key, because what you want is to get to a point where you can identify every case, trace it, and then only quarantine those positive cases and their context.
Social distancing and masks are increasingly important as public activities come back slowly. 24 states have statewide mandates requiring residents to wear masks in public.
We know how important it is to be wearing masks, to be keeping physical distance, to be lowering density. So it does not need to be as bad as New York.
In a survey conducted by the Cleveland Fed, more than 60% of consumers said that they would be extremely likely to wear a mask if required by local authorities.
I don't think things are going to feel anything like normal until we have a widely distributed, widely trusted vaccine.
And so the race is on to develop just such a vaccine. So far, vaccines developed by Moderna and Pfizer have reached crucial phase 3 trials, during which the vaccines are tested on thousands of people for efficacy and safety.
Normally we do things in series, and that includes manufacturing scale-up. We're doing that in parallel.
But as much as we all hope for a completely effective vaccine right away, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, says there's a lot we can continue to do in the meantime, provided we all, and he means all, do our part.
A 50 to 60% effective vaccine is totally value added if you complement it with public health measures. So, give you an example historically, David. If you look at measles, measles is really an amazing vaccine. It's 97 to 98% effective. So in effect, the only thing you need to do with measles is vaccinate people, because the high degree of efficacy, which gives an amazing degree of herd immunity to the population. Whereas when you have a vaccine for a disease in which you can do public health measures to mitigate against the spread, you put those two things together, and I'd love to have a 80, 90% effective, but if we get a 50 to 60% effective, I'll feel good about that.
So as a practical matter, who's ahead in this race, as far as you can tell, in finding a vaccine that would be efficacious?
You know, it depends on what you mean by temporally ahead or efficacy ahead. There's no one that's ahead efficacy, because the proof of the pudding is that you need to do the large phase 3 clinical trial to determine efficacy and to confirm safety. There are a number of vaccines that have already entered phase 3 trial. There's one from England that is doing one in Brazil and South Africa. There is one that we started here in the 27th of July with Moderna. Pfizer started on the 27th of July. There are other companies that are going to be starting in the next month or 2 or 3. So you're talking about 5 or 6 or more companies, each of which have started at different times. We don't know which one is going to be better than the other. And you know what I hope? I hope they're all equivalently good, because that's what we need. We need vaccines not only for the United States, we need vaccines for the whole world.
Dr. Fauci, are you at all concerned that in the rush, and there's an undoubted rush to try to come up with a vaccine, we may run risks? Because I have read about when the polio vaccine was first developed, the first round of that was really actually deleterious to a lot of children who became paralyzed and even died from it. And they had to go back and sort of reinvent it. Are you worried that we will forego some of the safety that we need in developing that first vaccine here?
We pay particular attention to safety, and the rapidity with which we are moving relates more to technological advances in how you can make a vaccine even before you start testing it. That makes me confident that we are going to do everything we can to determine safety. So when we talk about speed, it doesn't mean sacrificing safety considerations, nor does it mean sacrificing scientific integrity. It means we've been able to do things more quickly because of risks that we take financially. So when people hear risk, they think, oh, is that a risk to me? No, it means that you do things in advance of making investments in preparing clinical trial sites and even starting to manufacture the vaccine before you even know it works. When you do that, If it works, you've saved several months. If it doesn't work, the only thing you've lost is money. And since this is such an urgent situation, the federal government feels it's worth the financial risk to get extra months of it. So it's not going to be a risk of safety.
It seems to me at this point, masks, everyone agrees if everyone wore a mask for some period of time, it would really help us in fighting this disease. Why don't we have a requirement nationally to wear masks?
You know, I mean, obviously there are some that will argue back and forth. I mean, for me as a public health official, obviously I would like the consideration that everybody wears a mask. We live in a country, as you well know, in which the states have a lot of responsibility. And there is pushback. And one of the concerns, I'm not saying it's the overriding concern, but let me tell you what I hear when people speak about this, is that when you mandate something, you're going to have to essentially enforce it. And will the energy that's put into enforcing actually be a distraction? Will some people push back more when you mandate? For me, I'm not necessarily think that that's the best route to go of not mandating it, but that's not my decision. The issue is if we uniformly and consistently give the message that it is extremely important for everyone to wear a mask, that could be as good as a mandate, because there may be some pushback about mandates. The bottom line is the vice president is now consistently wearing a mask. We've seen the president tweet about wearing masks and wearing masks himself. I think we have a consistent message right now.
What is the role of information in fighting this pandemic as a practical matter? I mean, and particularly consistent information, because we are sort of getting conflicting messages from the parents. So if you forgive that analogy, we kids out here. I mean, for example, President Trump on hydroxychloroquine just the day before yesterday said, you know, I really believe it's very effective. He went after Dr. Birx. What can we do to get everybody on the same page? Because we don't know. We're not infectious disease experts. We're trying to figure out how to comply. We need a consistent message. How can we get to that world?
I think when you're dealing with things that are purely medical, I mean, remember, when you talk about the situation we're in now, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we have other considerations that have to do with economic and political and other things. I have nothing to do with that. If you're talking about a medical question, listen to the medical experts. That's the advice. And you will not get a conflicting message from the medical experts about things like hydroxychloroquine, about what the results of a vaccine trial are, or what the results of monoclonal antibodies. So when it comes to pure public health medical things, listen to what the medical experts say.
So Dr. Fauci, let's look into your crystal ball right now, and assuming we don't have an fully effective vaccine in the next 18 to 24 months, what does a trading floor on Wall Street look like? What does a school look like? What does a public event look like?
You know, I got to tell you, David, I believe, and I sound like a broken record, which is good, because I want to sound like a broken record. And that is, there are things that we can do without shutting down the country that can get those numbers down to a manageable amount, that you could do things that would be very productive and enhancing of the economy. We should not think of either lockdown completely or caution to the wind. There's a middle ground that we can do of the 5 or 6 things that I mentioned to you that will allow us to prudently and carefully open up the economy. It's not all or none. I think there's a misperception that unless we either lock down or open up, there's nothing in between. There is something in between. The issue is, and I want to give this a point because I really am going to, over the next days to weeks, keep repeating it over and over again. We got to make sure that all the links in the chain of the United States of America as a country, bringing that virus down to a level that we can function, where we don't have to lock down, where we can revitalize the economy. We can do it, but all the links have got to work.
That was Dr. Anthony Fauci of the NIH. Coming up, the challenge of returning students to the classroom through the eyes of someone who ran the Chicago school system and then the U.S. Department of Education, Arne Duncan.
What we haven't done to make our communities safe, which would in turn make our schools safe, means that many places are going to have to open only virtually.
This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. Arne Duncan has devoted his life to education. He took time off from college to work for his mother's after-school program on the south side of Chicago, became CEO of the Chicago public school system, and ultimately served as Secretary of Education under President Barack Obama. So he knows both the importance and the challenges of returning public school students to the classroom this fall.
All of us desperately want to go to a physical school, to be in person. The challenge, and the terrible challenge, is that that's not always safe to do. And what we haven't done as adults across the country, David, in March and April and May and June and July, and now we're starting to August, what we haven't done to make our communities safe, which would in turn make our schools safe, means that many places are going to have to open only virtually. Some places may be able to start with a hybrid, and very few places are going to be able to open with children and adults there physically. And it's bad for kids, it's bad for education, but we, as a country, have lacked discipline, we've lacked a commitment to science, we haven't followed what's worked in other countries, and it's just had a terrible effect, a destructive impact on education, on kids, and ultimately, obviously, on the COVID death rate in the country, which is unacceptably high and still rising.
Yeah, and Arne, I'm struck by the fact that I think that New York City is the only major school district right now still holding out the possibility of really reopening physically. Your old school district of Chicago has said they can't do it right away. At the same time, when we talk about remote learning, that's one thing, let's be honest, for upper middle class, upper class people with their fancy MacBooks and things like that, a lot of support, a lot of Wi-Fi. There are a lot of urban school districts across the country that really struggle with remote learning. Can we really teach children in some of these large urban school districts through remote learning?
For better or worse, what this pandemic has done, David, is it's ripped the scab, ripped the Band-Aid off these gaping wounds of massive inequities across our society, and yes, of course, in our educational system. And we have to make sure children can learn anything they want, anytime, anywhere. We have to close the digital divide.
It strikes me that there are real challenges with remote learning for the child, but also for the supervision at home. A lot of kids, you can't just put them in a room and have them do it. And also for the teachers. It can't be the same teaching remotely as it is in person. What can we do to help that process? Because it must be a different process.
When the pandemic started, we were thrown into this virtual, learning world, very, very quickly without preparation. Teachers have had a couple months now to try and work on this, to have professional development, to get better at it. It is still imperfect, but again, I would push that the idea that children somehow should only learn, in a bricks and mortar building, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, 9 months a year, it doesn't make sense. That's outdated. It's outmoded, and I want our children being able to learn anything they want, anytime, anywhere, find their passion, find their genius. So making sure we close that digital divide, get devices to every single child across this country, make it as ubiquitous as electricity and running water. We have to do that now through public-private partnerships.
That was Arne Duncan, managing partner of the Emerson Collective. Coming up, we talk tech with one of its shrewdest investors, Cathie Wood of Arc Investment Management. This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. One of the big stories of the week was President Trump's attempts to shut down the U.S. operations of two very large Chinese tech companies. We started the week with TikTok, and then as the week went on, we added WeChat to the list. We welcome now one of the shrewdest tech investors around. She's Cathie Wood, the founder, the CEO, and the Chief Investment Officer of Arc Investment Management. Welcome, Cathie. Always great to have you with us. What do you make of this? Is this simply a particular response to a particular circumstance, or are we really pursuing a policy of trying to build something of a wall when it comes to the internet between us and China?
Well, we're certainly trying to do that. And the administration may say it is for national security reasons and privacy and so forth. We actually, on our brainstorm today, talked to a national security expert. He doesn't think that that TikTok represents a national security risk, but he does indeed say that from a privacy point of view, assume that the Chinese government knows everything about you if you sign on to TikTok, which I did recently, actually.
Do you like the videos, Cathie?
I like dancing videos, so yes, but I can see how people are addicted. I haven't picked it up because I know if I pick it up, I won't put it down.
So, Cathie, as you look at this, is there a little bit of turnabout as fair play going on? Because after all, China for years has blocked things like Facebook and Google from the United States. So, are we doing anything to them that they haven't done to us already?
Yeah, that's true. Yes, I think that's true. I think what this suggests, however, is that to the extent Tencent, and the administration also went after Tencent today as well, at least verbally so far, and Alibaba want to expand from China, and they're getting to be so big within China that if they want to keep up their growth rates, which are north of 20-30%, on the top line, they need to spread their wings elsewhere. And perhaps this is one way of, as you say, this is playing war, of preventing some of those giants from infiltrating the rest of the world.
Could this also have some ramifications for other U.S. tech companies? Because as I read about it, the language that was proposed was so broad, it would suggest it could have hurt, for example, Apple putting these sorts of apps on their phones, even over in China, perhaps.
Yes, this could be a war of sorts. It's been interesting to watch the back and forth for almost 2 years now with this administration. It's 2 steps forward towards, all-out war, and then 1 step back. So I don't think President Trump wants to risk this economic expansion or this recovery from the coronavirus crisis. And to be blocking China would be harmful. So I think he won't be full out in terms of war, but will continue to saber rattle. And I think it's partly because it's an election year, and he feels as though his fears have been borne out as we've seen the coronavirus escape China and so forth. So I think there's more about election year campaigning in this than many people understand.
As the week progressed, there was a fair amount of talk about the possibility of Microsoft buying either the U.S. operations of TikTok or even something larger than that. As an investor, as a tech investor who's been quite successful in this area, does it make sense to you? I mean, if you were a Microsoft investor, would you want them going back in the business to consumer business? They were in that before, didn't do so well. They've done terribly well to B2B with the cloud.
Yes, so their bread and butter is enterprise. Now, they do have Xbox. That has been very successful as a franchise. But as they've tried to get into the streaming gaming world by poaching Ninja from Twitch for $10 million and putting him on their mixer, they learned the hard way that you cannot import talent. You have to have the right DNA. And I think what they're going to do now, instead of building, they're trying to buy their way into a broader consumer franchise to balance their business perhaps a little bit more like Google's is.
So, Cathie, we can't have you on and not talk about Tesla, because you've been a big champion of Tesla. You've done very, very well with it, continues to do well. Give us a sense of how the pandemic may be changing transportation here. Obviously, people are more reluctant to go on mass transit. Is there an opportunity there for a company like Tesla?
Well, there certainly is, and we're hearing that Tesla, in fact, Elon Musk has said as much or hinted as much on recent earnings calls, that Tesla will start its own ride-hailing service to compete against Uber and Lyft. And the competitive advantage that Tesla will have here is it will go to the Uber and Lyft drivers who have been hurt badly in here and their incomes drained significantly, and we'll say to them, okay, if you put up 5,000, 7,000, whatever the number is, to buy this car, trade in your car, put in 5,000, 7,000, buy a Model 3, you can work the rest of it off, and we'll throw insurance in there as well, because Tesla's going to self-insure. We know this is a good thing for drivers because the total cost of ownership of a Model 3 today is about 30% less than that of a Toyota Camry, especially when you include the trade-in value of cars. We believe the trade-in value of the Model 3 is actually going to go up because of this ride-hailing opportunity, and that anyone who signs on to this network, say a person does take Tesla up on its offer, they'll drive, let's say, 50 to 60% of the day. Unlike you and I who drive maybe 4 or 5 times a day, Tesla will get that much more data to feed its AI engine and to move into the autonomous world. And then these drivers, they won't lose their jobs, which they would if they had stayed at Uber and Lyft.
Right.
They'll actually become entrepreneurs because they'll be able to send these autonomous cars out and earn money on them.
So briefly here at the end, Cathie, Uber's been struggling a bit lately. Does that make Tesla pause, or does it double down because this is a perfect time?
Oh, I think this is a perfect time. And in doing so, what Tesla does is lower the probability of any bear case for Tesla, because ride hailing is so much more profitable and it's a recurring revenue model compared to just selling cars. And it is a bridge to their autonomous taxi network. So I think they'll have a running start this way. It's going to be pretty exciting.
Boy, well, you usually are excited about Tesla, but that'd be quite a move to take on Uber. Fascinating. Thank you so much. Cathie Wood, that's the person we turn to for technology to talk about things like that growing war between the United States and China over TikTok and WeChat, and of course, always Tesla. Tesla's done extremely well, as Cathie, in fairness, has predicted. She's been a bull right all along the way, even as other companies like General Motors introduced their first electric vehicle in Cadillac. And so that does it for that discussion of technology with Cathie Wood of ARK Investment Management. Finally, one more thought. Calling the ball game because of COVID. We're used to baseball games called because of rain, but this shortened season, we've introduced a whole new player to America's favorite pastime. It's doctors, not umpires, calling games because of COVID, not the weather. First, when the Miami Marlins had to postpone 7 games when 18 players tested positive, and then when the St. Louis Cardinals missed another 7 because 13 players and staff came down with it. To be sure, baseball has a ringer in its corner, with one of its biggest fans, Dr. Anthony Fauci, rooting for his hometown Washington Nationals to be able to play out the entire season.
I've spoken to many of the officials of the league and of different teams, particularly my own team that's mine here in Washington is the Washington Nationals. They are very serious about the safety and the welfare of the players and the personnel.
But even the most avid fan has to admit that the season hangs in the balance, as we all hope that the boys of summer don't turn into the boys of wait until next year. That does it for this episode of Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. This is Bloomberg. See you next week.